perfect player doesn't exist.
Right.
Tavares, of course, he's been scrutinized for his skating. His playmaking ability, his decision. He's a shoot-first mentality type of guy and so on, but that's not quite a bad thing with him as we've seen.
Right.
But the New York Islanders have instantly brought credibility, I think, to their ticket base in terms of giving them an exciting player to watch. Hedman may make your team better in some respects on the back end.
Right.
But John Tavares was an absolute must, I think, for the New York Islanders.
Well, I was saying...
And sorry to interrupt, but also I had a good conversation with a friend about this the other day. So Hedman goes number 2 to Tampa Bay.
Right.
And, that's the best possible fit for Tampa Bay because they have Stamkos, another guy who was a surefire number 1 last year and had great offensive skills. A Stamkos Tavares, is probably not as beneficial to the overall membrane of the team as a Stamkos Hedman is.
Right.
So I think it worked really well for Tampa Bay as well.
Right. Well, I was saying on the show before we came on here that the last year's leading scoring forward for the Islanders was 39 points.
Wow.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So hey, does Tavares play right away?
Yep, no doubt about it.
Goes right into it.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Yep.
Actually, I'll give you, the higher you go, your number 1 has to play.
Right.
And not very often does a number 1 not play. But I'll give you an interesting scenario. I saw it briefly, but was it on TSN? They were running a show about the draft 2 years ago, like a kind of a documentary,
right,
an insider view, and they were following the St. Louis Blues. And the Blues wanted tremendously to move up to take Jakub Voracek, to take Jake, basically the ex-Moosehead, of course.
Mm-hmm.
They were trying to move up to 3rd to get him. I forget who had 3rd at the time, but they were declined there. And then they tried to move up to 6th and couldn't get him there. If they had got him at number 3, chances are you wouldn't have seen Jakub Voracek. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
Back in the Quebec League. So would the Mooseheads have gone after Marchand and sold the farm to go for it last year?
Right.
Not the year that just passed, but when they had the Brad Marchand, acquisition, they were tremendously looking to win the league title. Now they're paying for it, and they'll be paying for it for a number of years. But if Jakub Voracek hadn't returned that year, if the Blues had moved up to number 3, their chances are they would have been a middle of the pack team and been a lot stronger right now. But to answer your question, your number 1's got to play.
Right. But what about now with Stamkos this past year? Was there any other option they had for Stamkos? Because there was some feeling early on that they were pushing him too soon.
Barry Melrose.
Right.
Now, it was Barry Melrose that kind of came out and said that and didn't know if he was ready for the league or not. And,
right.
He definitely proved his way, and I think that's what you have to do. You have to be patient with your kids.
Right.
Here, Coach Cam Russell, the Mooseheads, talk about Brett Andrews, who the Mooseheads, was a bit of a coup for them to get him in the first round. And something will be done, I think, about this NCAA fiasco that's going on, and especially in the Quebec League. And we can talk about that another time because that's a whole other conversation. But
right.
You know what? Cam Russell right now is saying, hey, if we get the kid we wanted, he's going to play, but we're not going to rush him.
Right.
We're not going to put him in first-line power play and out there against the other team's top lines, which traditionally, your number 1 players are going to play against. It's going to be worked in, and that's exactly what they did with Stamkos. And look at how nicely he developed. I'm sure there was a lot of question marks early on, but it takes time to adjust.
Right.
Here he was a tremendous asset in the World Championships for Canada, and that just goes to show how well he evolved and how well he kind of came into the professional hockey role, because he's a man among boys in junior hockey, even though he was only 17 years old. Right.
Matt Duchene, taken by Colorado with the 3rd pick. Some guys on TSN were saying that he's a guy who could be better than Tavares in 5 or 6 years. Do we know anything about this kid?
Yeah, you know what? I don't. I do know a little bit about him. I'm trying to, of course, keep a close eye on this. But
right.
What I heard about Duchene was that he was the guy that was the dark horse for number 1, and that I don't think anybody aside from the star quality of Tavares, and that Tavares is going to give you some offense.
Right.
That Duchene seemed to be that better all-around player, the player that was perhaps more pro-ready than in all assets of his game From what I hear and from what they're saying, this kid is a can't miss kid. But you also have to realize, a lot of times, and just the layman and the everyday hockey fan, they're looking at numbers.
Right.
So at the end of the year, John Tavares is going to have better numbers than Matt Duchene. There's no doubt about it.
Right. So sticking with the Q and some local interest, Simon Dupree, taken by the Pens.
Yeah.
How long before he plays? Or he's 6'4", 205 pounds. Is he going to make that team anytime soon, or does he go back to St. John this year?
Oh yeah, he's back in St. John. I would say without a doubt. He's
okay.
This will be his 18-year-old year.
Right.
This is a kid that the scouts always watch. That's got it all: size, speed, smarts. Not, he's not the type of kid that's going to. You're going to look at him and say, this kid's unbelievable. He's
right.
just a total package at 17.
Right.
He is a man-child at 17 years old, and that gets you a long way in the inner circles of hockey. But no, he does need some more time to develop. He's still prone to mistakes. The Mooseds, last year when they played them, of course the Mooseds didn't have a lot of success last year, but they definitely had success against St. John. I don't know if you remember, especially in the early going.
Yeah.
And the key was they said, hey, this guy doesn't like to be hit, and they went after him and they hit him, and if you rattle him a couple of times. But again, is he scared to be hit? No, I think that has a lot to do with him being 17. Yeah, he'll I'm sure he'll be in the league yet for another couple of years, to be honest.
And the Cape Breton goalie, I'm going to correct me if I'm wrong, Olivier Waugh.
Yeah, Olivier Waugh.
Okay, he was selected by Edmonton in the 5th round.
Yeah.
What are his chances?
Well, he was. Perhaps I think he dropped off a little bit. He was slated to go in 2nd or 3rd round.
Okay.
So they were a little disappointed in where he dropped. But I read an article from his coach Mario DeRoche in Cape Breton, and he made a real good point, saying Edmonton's depth in terms of their minor league systems and the players that they're bringing up in net isn't great. So this bodes well for Waugh. He's not going to step into an NHL roster for quite some time, and I think it takes a goaltender longer on the development scale. It's more like a college basketball player. There are a few exceptions in college basketball, baseball, and football. Of course, the draft's different and the rules are different in each aspect. Where you're not going to see an 18-year-old in the NBA, it's not going to be allowed anymore.
Right.
They're going to have to do a year of, I don't know what the rule is now, Bill, but I know they can't come out of high school anymore.
Right.
Hockey, you still can. You can still have a kid who's 18 years old playing in the NHL. But Waugh is a goaltender, and that's a longer learning curve.
Right.
That curve is different than somebody stepping in and playing a fourth-line role. When you're a goaltender, you need minutes. You're not going to come in to back up, right? You're going to come in to play. So where do you play? Usually you're going to play in the minors. You're going to learn the game, the pro game that is in the minors.
Right.
Now, the thing about Waugh is he relies predominantly on athleticism. He was a lot like Marc-Andre Fleury was, who was one of the most athletic goaltenders I've ever seen and continues to be. But then, his fundamentals and his basics and his techniques had to catch up. And as you've noticed, they probably have. He just won a Stanley Cup.
Right.
But Waugh, he's the same way, athletic, and he's got to get those fundamentals caught up. But the problem with him is that, and he's listed at 5'11", I think that's very generous.
Right.
He still likes to go down. For a small goaltender, that's going to give a lot of the top of the net up.
Right.
So, he's a guy that will play pro. There's no doubt about it. He is that tremendous as an athlete in net. But if we see this guy in the show, I would say early 20s,
right.
At the best.
Just one more question. Let's talk about Chris Pronger, traded to Philadelphia. On the surface, this seems like a perfect matchup. The Flyers gave up Jeffrey Loophole. Who have you talked about him? You like that kid?
I do.
Yeah. So how do you feel about that trade?
Well, you know what? I was away at a cottage this weekend, so I'm just kind of catching up on all this. I did find out about Pronger, and I haven't read anything about it. All I know is that he was traded for Loophole. But quite simply, Philly always has, and I think will always like their reputation as Broad Street bullies. They like it.
Right.
And that's the brand that Philadelphia fans want to come out and see. Who would make a better bully than Chris Pronger? That's his game. He is the ultimate bully in the NHL.
How old is Pronger?